So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Remote Leadership in Startups and Small Business webinar. My name is Steve Sauer. I am a senior lecturer in the Johnson School of College of Business and an entrepreneur in residence at Ithaca Startup Works and Cornell's Center for Regional Economic Advancement. And I will be moderating today's discussion. This webinar is being hosted by the Center for Regional Economic Advancement at Cornell University and welcomes constituents from the Johnson Entrepreneurship Track, UNYI Core Node, Black Entrepreneurs in Training at Cornell, the Southern Tier Startup Alliance, We Cornell, Grow New York, 76 West, Ithaca Startup Works and Rev's Hardware Programs, and Cornell Engineering Commercialization Fellows and Kessler Fellows. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be available for attendees. If you have a question at any time during the session, please use the Q&A function on the webinar screen. Type in your question, and a CREA team member will monitor the questions submitted and ask the panelists to answer. Live captioning is provided through the subtitles feature. You may access the subtitles by selecting the CC button on the bottom of the Zoom session. Now let's meet our panelists. Ken Rother is the director of Ithaca Startup Works and its hardware entrepreneurship program. He's the managing director of Cornell's eLab Student Accelerator Program, teaches entrepreneurship at the Johnson School, instructs and coaches in several technology commercialization programs, including NSF I-Corps, and is a venture partner at Cayuga Venture Fund. Ken has held multiple senior technical and business positions for organizations such as Discovery Communications, Reuters, Matrox, and the Toronto Stock Exchange, and he has direct startup experience with software and online media businesses in Toronto and New York. Charlie Mulligan is the CEO and co-founder of GiveGab, the world's leading platform for community-wide fundraising. 40,000 nonprofits around the world have raised nearly $2 billion on GiveGab. During his 30-plus year career in entrepreneurship, management, and fundraising, Charlie has recruited and led hundreds of employees, worked with thousands of clients in virtually every industry, and helped raise over $20 million in capital for multiple successful companies. He has a BA in marketing from Penn State and an MBA from Cornell. And outside of GiveGab, his passion is riding his mountain bike with his wife, Rena. Nickitas is the founder and CEO of Rosie, the industry-leading online grocery shopping platform for mobile and web. Rosie partners with leading independent retailers and their wholesalers to provide e-commerce, delivery opportunities, omni-channel marketing, and deep data services. The company launched in 2012 and today enables customers to shop online from their favorite local stores for same-day delivery or in-store pickup. Prior to founding Rosie, Nick was COO of a financial services technology company based in Germany and was the director of business development at a company pioneering advanced technology for high-volume, multi-asset institutional securities trading. And finally, Mannix is the Whitney Olin Professor of Management at the Johnson Graduate School of Management. She is an expert in the area of organizational performance, exploring factors that make people motivated, high-performing leaders, and team members. She teaches and consults with firms, universities, and professional societies around the world, and she has received numerous awards for her research and teaching. And we thank the panelists for joining us today. So let's get started. You've all had experience leading or working with a remote workforce. Please share with us some of the things you've experienced. What are some of the biggest challenges associated with remote work and how did you handle them? And I'd like to start with Ken. So Ken, the software business that you founded was organized as a virtual company from day one. Knowing from the outset that the people in your organization were never going to be working in physical proximity to one another, what problems did you foresee and what considerations did you make when you set up the work for that company?
Thanks, Steve. So the company, as Steve said, the company treehugger.com, which is still around, it started off as a complete virtual company, but it started off quite small. We started off, we were like 8 or 9 people. So at the time we were using, we were using Skype. Slack didn't exist yet, doing a lot of text messaging back and forth. When we were just 8 or 9 people, there was just a general channel. So either I'd have a one-on-one conversation with a colleague if I needed to do that, or there was a one-on-one, or there was a general, what we called the water cooler, where someone would put something in that they expected everybody to see. And that worked fine until we grew a little bit. And as soon as we grew a little bit, there was too many things happening in that general channel, and things were getting missed. So one of the first things we did is we broke out that general channel into just a couple of topics. For instance, we generated online content. So one of the things writers are obsessed with are good headlines, good opening titles for their posts. And that was something they always were bouncing off of each other. Hey, what do you think of this? How could I tweak it? So we had a place that was dedicated for people who are looking for feedback on a particular idea. So that was sort of separated out from the general channel. The next thing that happened is we grew a little bit more was it became clear we couldn't really have this general channel and hope that everyone was seeing the communication. So we instituted formal bi-weekly all hands. So that was something where everybody went to, and the two leads of the organization, myself and Graham, we would, communicate whatever it is, and we take questions, of course. We would have an all hands every day with our senior team. I'm sorry, not an all hands, a stand up every day with our senior team. So we'd meet our senior team 5 to 10 minutes every day, and they would then choose to cascade that information however they saw fit, either individually or in groups. But it became way too cumbersome to have everybody asking questions sort of about very tactical things about their job in a big open forum. And it was also disempowering the managers. So we wanted the managers of each organization, and these were editorial leads mostly, they would work with their writers in smaller pools. We would work with them in this daily stand-up. And then we would meet everyone still wanted to know what was going on, and we still wanted to communicate with everybody. So we have a more general, just kind of corporate strategy, kind of more social thing on a bi-weekly basis. So we kind of grew into it. The other thing we learned very quickly was that we had to tell people it was okay not to be there all the time. They needed to tell us when they were there and not there, and use the status indicator. But people got really nervous that they were being measured, and they felt like they had to be glued to their computer all the time. And that's not what we were trying to do. Writing is inherently a creative activity, and sometimes you just need to think. So we had to calm everybody down that we weren't using this as some sort of behind the scenes measurement system of how many hours you were putting in. So that was some of the stuff we started to learn.
That's interesting. What you talk about this kind of top down and dissemination to the organization. Were there any sort of checks from the bottom up that the word was getting out all the way down the channel?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. So we tried to have as open door a policy. It was not, you could, obviously talk to your manager. It was very clear in our corporate culture that you could just come to me or Graham. You're not going to be punished. Or we would be very clear, unless it was a very personal issue. We would probably talk to your manager about it, but there was nothing stopping you from coming directly to us or other people in the organization. So what we didn't want to have is meetings where everyone needed to be there and you couldn't surface your issue. We wanted to give you a way to do it, but there was nothing stopping you. And therefore that kind of, we'll talk about this later, it played into our hiring strategy. We needed people who were comfortable with this idea, especially in the middle management level, that people were going to talk to them, but they were also going to talk to us as the leads of the organization.
Great points, thanks. Charlie, at GiveGab, your situation was a bit different. So in the days prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, some of your team members were remote all along, and some of your team members were physically co-located and working right alongside one another. Today, your entire workforce is working from home. So how did you work together before, when you had a co-located group and a remote group? And now that you're remote, have you taken some of those practices and sort of translated it to the entire organization and applied it to the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were really fortunate in that we had a lot of systems set up to operate remote, because we have about 55 employees, and about 40 of them were in our office in Ithaca. We had about 6 or 7 in an office in Austin, Texas, and then the rest are remote. And so we've had to kind of have these systems in place, using Zoom all the time, using Slack all the time, regular kind of stand-up meetings and focus board and other things that we would do every week. But I think for me, it was really, culture is the most important thing, really for me. And our team feels like it's very connected normally. And so I was pretty concerned right away that how this would impact us, because it's not just that we're all remote, but all of a sudden, the things that we normally do aren't there anymore. and this is really a traumatic experience in general for people in their personal lives. So I think for me, I really, I decided that really the only three things mattered as soon as we started to see how this was kind of playing out is the well-being of our employees, the well-being of our customers, and then just managing cash flow, because we weren't sure, obviously this is, we weren't sure how this was going to impact our business or anybody else's business. And so this is really manifested in us talking a lot internally about, our job is to empathize with our clients first, to empathize with each other as people, and then really to adapt and innovate, because things are changing. And so that means there's also opportunities to really help our clients. And since we sell virtual fundraising, we've actually seen a lot more business out of this than we would have expected otherwise. And so for us, I mean, we're trying to do different things. I actually don't have to spend much time getting people to work more. We actually are thinking of ways like, how do we, since they're at home in their office now, how do we get them to maybe stop working sometimes, because it's not healthy if they just work all the time. And we want to do fun things like virtual happy hours and other things. But I think just it's really like a general view that we try to talk to each other as people first, and employees and customers second, or really never right now. I mean, I think we just want to think of people as people. And I think some ways that's really helped by what's happening, because I mean, you can even see now, you're seeing inside my house, I'm seeing inside other people's houses. There are a lot of ways that I think some people feel more connected. I mean, it really depends on the personal situation. I think we use a service called Tiny Pulse, and I can tell some people actually really like this, and some people, this is much more difficult. It depends on their situation. I think having kids in your house actually dramatically changes how much you like working at home and other things like that. So it's really, there's no like one size fits all, but it's something that we really have to think about. And I think for us as both myself as a CEO, but us as a management team, just thinking of, again, those three things of empathizing with our customers, empathizing with each other, and making sure we adapt and innovate as much as we can. I think it keeps people kind of focused on that. So it helps. Nice.
Betta, this is kind of your area. Charlie talks a lot about maintaining this engaged culture and keeping team members connected. We can all understand why that's important. How is that affected when a company goes to a remote setting, and what are some things to think about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is to sort of maintain a sense of teamness, right? And that's one of the things that we lose when we go into the more remote setting. So there's definitely a sense of psychological distance. So we're talking about social distance, right? In the era of COVID, but the other thing that starts to happen as we move apart, whether we've been partially remote before or whether we've never done that, is that we sort of create more psychological distance. And so one of the things to do, I think, is to think about, well, how can we pull back together with the sense of psychological closeness? And I mean, one of the things that Charlie said, which I think is so interesting, is that we're suddenly like in each other's homes. And one sense about that sometimes is we want to try to create like more distance by saying, well, I don't want you to see like the mess behind me or my kids running around behind me or other things. And the truth is that actually being more transparent can be helpful. So if I let you into my reality of, look, my day is not like your day. So my day might be a little more difficult. Like in the morning, I have to do something with my kids, or in the evening, I have to put dinner on the table, or I also have a spouse in the other room who's on Zoom, and that's why my internet connection's breaking up. That can be helpful to tell you that, because that's why maybe the deadline that you're asking me to get a report due to you is going to be a little later today. But if I don't tell you that, then trust can break down. And that can be really difficult. So making inferences about why I'm a little later with something or why I'm stressed, if I cover that and I don't tell you those things, then transparency is more difficult between us and trust can start to break down. So engaging in more empathy can be helpful, but the other thing that can be really helpful here is perspective getting instead of perspective taking. And what I mean by that is asking questions and trying to actually sort of welcome this sort of sense of shared reality. And certainly the team leader can help with that by trying to understand, what's going on with everyone by asking these kinds of questions. And I know Charlie might talk about this later, but I know Charlie's a great leader of his team, and as are all of our panelists today, talks about like really talking to every single member of his team once a week and trying to figure out what's going on. That's a huge burden, but it's hugely important to actually ask the questions and not assume, so that you can build that sense of shared reality amongst the team members.
Let's flip that around a little bit. So you talk about it from the leader's perspective of going after to get this perspective, which I think is key and certainly applicable to a lot of us. What about folks who are in the follower role in terms of, feeding our perspective and sharing our context with the people we work around? There's also some responsibility incumbent upon all of us who work virtually to make sure other people know where we are and what's going on in our lives. Is that fair? Or?
I think that's true, right? And I think sometimes there's a reluctance because, again, sometimes we might feel like, well, I don't want to ask a personal question because suddenly we are in a more personal space. But at the same time, I think the more that can be role modeled by others, and that can be modeled by the leader, but that can also be opened up by saying that part of what we're trying to do here is simple things like, and Ken mentioned this too, am I supposed to be on all the time? So when does the workday end? But if we can set up boundaries by saying, look, we're going to set up a communication plan that says, the workday ends and that's okay, or take a weekend, that's okay, because we don't know when those lines are going to blur. And so I'm going to set up that role model, or I'm going to be able to say like, hey, this is not business as usual right now. So we're moving into a time where we're suddenly feeling like, oh, it's just virtual work. No, it's not. It's not business as usual. And other things are going on in life where I can't just walk over to your cubicle and say, oh, wow, you look like you have a lot of work. You seem kind of stressed. There's other additional things going on in the world that are stressing people. And so if I can ask that question and I can role model that, and we can do some of the other things that are not just the formal work tasks, but take the time to build in it's a virtual happy hour or some other virtual social things that allow us to either take a few minutes at the beginning of a meeting to vent, or also allow people to say, I don't need to be at this meeting, I'm going to check out, and that doesn't mean that I'm not a valued member of the team. That again builds that foundation of trust and that ability to say, yeah, these are the things that we're going to do in this team that allow us to still be part of that important community.
Great, thank you.
A few questions have come in from the audience. I just wanted to run these by you. Sort of as a manager, senior leader of virtual teams, thinking back upon employees and relationships and that kind of thing, what would you say are best practices for employees to continue being successful in the softer side of their work in a virtual medium?
And I think that kind of goes to the point you were just making, Betta, the idea of transparency and sharing a lot of the context or the situation that people are in. Would you add to that? What other best practices, not necessarily for Betta, other CEOs as well, what have you seen that make people particularly successful or do well in this virtual setting?
Yeah, I could start with this, and I'm sure that other people on the panel have some great examples of things that they've done. But one of the things that people can do is just remember to set up things like small rituals that they might do. So they might do things that are basically to have both a formal kind of and an informal communication setting. So Ken mentioned something like have a water cooler, have something where people can share not only kind of ideas and brainstorming sessions, but also to share something like, you might set up something where it's either at the beginning of a meeting, people talk about something that is going on in their lives right now, or they might do a TGI sort of once a week where they just sit down and have a drink together, or they might sit down and talk about kind of their last vacation that they went on. It's something that's social to connect each other, right? Something like that. So doing something that is remembering that it's not just work. It's not just all about work. And there's other kinds of things that I've seen people do, like share recipes, something like that, whatever is kind of part of your culture in your firm that connects the social as well as the work side of things as well. Remembering birthdays, those are some of the kinds of things.
Okay.
Ken has
Ken,
something
you've
too.
got a.
Yeah,
sorry,
so
Matt.
I just want to build on that point, because one of the things, you know, we learned, or we had made some hiring mistakes, because there's some folks who really need work as their social life, but they need an in-person social life. So we tried to build that social aspect of people talking about what they're going to do on the weekend and whatever. And for some people, that was great. They could make that connection and they could relate to each other, even though most of us had never met each other till years into the company. But there were other folks, and these were hiring goofs on our part, that I kind of learned my lesson. There were some people where that wasn't enough. Their social life needed to be a face-to-face thing, and they had trouble in the organization. It just didn't resonate the same way for them, and they just were uncomfortable. So I don't have any magic answer to how you figure those things out, but we learned just in the interview process, asking questions about, you know, people, you know, what they do and what their interests are and so forth. And you can get a sense of how much of their social life had traditionally been rolled up in their previous face-to-face employment versus, you know, it's a private social life and therefore it's not going to be a problem, you know, on the weekends and so forth. So it was kind of interesting.
This brings us to Nick. Nick is in a bit of a more unique situation. Let's talk about your experience at Rosie. So at a time when everyone is sheltering in place and maintaining their social distance, the demand for online grocery and delivery service like yours has skyrocketed. So you told us last week, Rosie's seen a 10x volume increase in the past 2 weeks. And while other companies are laying off, you're hiring up aggressively. So how are you managing that process of finding, hiring, recruiting people in a virtual setting, and then managing those folks for performance? And tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, thanks, Steve. So, you know, I guess for context, retailers right now across the US are rushing to implement new health protocols to protect their shoppers, but also to protect their in-store associates. And this entire crisis has proven that online grocery shopping is really tailor-made to weather this pandemic. Each online order that comes into the store, that's one shopper that maybe had health concerns that now doesn't have to go into the in-store environment and has a way to attain access to fresh foods. This keeps other shoppers and store associates safe. And with our latest tech, we are getting stores up and running in 5 to 10 business days, offering no contact delivery and helping them efficiently manage labor and supply issues while navigating through the crisis. You mentioned 10x growth over the last 2 weeks. We're now doing more volume through our platform every 3 days than we did in the month of February. And it's basically acting as a double every 5 to 10 days as we move forward. So soon we're going to be at, probably within the next 4 weeks, we'll be at 20x transaction volume through our system. And we've needed to rapidly scale up for our team to support the demand for our services. I think there's a couple challenges here. One, we've got to hire people very, very fast. So how do you onboard someone? This is something we would normally do over a 2 to 4 week period. We now need to do it in less than a week. How do you train someone? Training, typically something you do over 30 days. We need to make new hires productive in 1 to 3 days. Integration, how do you make new hires feel part of the culture when the entire team is remote and distributed due to COVID-19? Performance management, crucial conversations, the type of things that you would do in HR in a room face-to-face are now happening remotely. So it's certain skills that were built up. Charlie talked about empathy. Empathy is sometimes it's well communicated when you're in the room with someone. It can be harder when there's that teleconferencing relationship. So what we've done is we posted a lot of positions. We staffed up. We did a 30% increase in our company within a 10-day period. Most of the jobs that we hired for are temp roles. Right now, there are a ton of unbelievable candidates from the travel, entertainment, hospitality, restaurant industries. Particularly, we found a lot of success hiring out of restaurant and hospitality because a lot of the roles we're filling right now are roles where you need to have great customer service skills wonderful guest experience, guest interaction skills. And we're finding that these candidates from restaurant and hospitality are bringing things into our culture as a software company that we never have before. They've got a totally different perspective in terms of how to engage those customers. So we do our screenings, which would normally would be maybe a 30-minute to an hour-long screening that would involve 2 or 3 team members, has now been truncated to a 15-minute screening. It's a quick test. Does this person meet the skills of the position? Are they able to, do they have a strong internet connection? Are they able to work the hours that we need? And we basically hire them and pair them up with a Rosie team member to quickly assess, is this somebody that's going to be successful? And I think where we would normally give a candidate maybe a 30-day trial period, we've now said, well, listen, after 7 days, after 10 days, if this person isn't keeping up with the other cohort of new team members around them, let's remove that team member and replace them with somebody new and see how that person goes. So it's all of our hiring process has been dramatically accelerated. We look for, it's very data oriented. We're looking for KPIs, key performance indicators, how many chats, how many support tickets, how many meetings the team members are attending on time, what is their customer satisfaction ratings from our shoppers. And we're using that to get an assessment of in real time how those team members are performing. But you know, it's been a challenge. And I think that over the next, as we implement the next phase of our hiring plan over the next 2 weeks, you know, we would have increased the size of the company 3x from March 8th, which is a huge scale up, particularly in a temp workforce, which is, you know, we're learning a lot of this stuff as we go.
So Nick, one of the questions that came in from the audience is based on something Charlie said, which is that he's using TinyPulse to track employee engagement. Is there any other software or tech that any of the speakers can recommend that can either enhance employee engagement or promote connectivity for work from home?
I mean, I'll say like one tool, one thing that we've worked on, and have used really successfully for our company is we do a monthly town hall. And we just did our town hall last night. We traditionally would do this in person. It's an all hands meeting. We take 2 hours the first Wednesday of every month, typically, to get together. And it's all about speaking truth to power, information dissemination, transparency. And you know, we've done this ritual, as Ben had talked about, every month for the past several years. And this was the first one we've done where the entire company has been remote and distributed. And it was powerful. We talked about not only the issues facing our business, where we've come from, where we're going, and where we're headed next, but personally, how this work from home quarantine is affecting our personal lives, our connection to the company, and the needs of our clients. So I think that that's maybe a low tech solution, but it's one that has been it was so powerful to see individual team members talk about their experience over the past several weeks. I mean, for us, we feel privileged that we have the opportunity to work at a time when so many are not able to, that we're able to help. We're able to help and actually make an impact on this crisis. And then finally, you know, our team members are able to help, but not necessarily put themselves in harm's way. I mean, first responders, grocery store clerks, they have to expose themselves every day to risks. We were able to do it from the safety of our own homes. And for our team, just talking about that and what we're going through as individuals and as a tribe was important to continue to maintain that unity. So I would probably say that the pulse check is important, but it is a tool that is complemented by what Charlie and I think what we're doing around that hands-on interaction, that connectivity between the team. That's what makes the pulse checks really impactful as you try to drive performance through this period.
Great, thanks, Nick. Ken, you wanted to talk about technology?
Actually, so at Korea, you know, we're in the same boat. All of a sudden, we're all working from home. Here we are, I think, coming up on week 4. And we use a tool that was an add-on for Slack called Ask Alice. It was a really simple tool. So every day at 10 o'clock, a sort of prompt goes out, you know, and 3 basic questions: how you doing? What are you working on? Any impediments? And then usually some sort of social question about favorite book or movie or this or that. And it serves a couple purposes. So on the one hand, we have a very open group, like all of our Slack channels are open. So this is just totally in line. So we get to see what everyone, how everyone's doing, what they're working on, what they accomplished, anything they're stuck on, what their favorite book is. but it also serves a second purpose. And we if someone doesn't check in, that's a warning to us. Maybe something's wrong. Not like we trust our folks. So, wait a minute. If someone didn't check in, is something okay? Are they dealing with a personal medical issue? Is there something going on in the family? And, we wait a few hours and then use that, because at this point in time, who knows what's going on? We're really, I don't want to say nervous, but we're worried about everybody. So it serves as kind of dual purpose, very easy tool to use.
Great, thanks. Charlie, you talked about Tiny Pulse. Any other favorite tech that you're using?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a meeting once a month, on all hands meeting. So I think it's very similar to town hall that Nick was talking about. And I think what's really interesting about it is that as we've grown, I think once we, got to the point where we passed 50 employees, I noticed that it was actually harder and harder to get people to speak up during it, because it's intimidating for people to just kind of talk in front of that group. But we just did our first one that was fully remote, and people that would never talk up in front of 50 some people had no problem talking. It's just like less intimidating, I think. And it was also really kind of cool to see a giant gallery of all these people that were, I mean, it was as equal as it possibly gets. I think I'd mentioned this once before, but humans are animals. We have weird ways of thinking about things. And I remember reading something about how people, for every inch of height, people get paid more. Like these goofy ways we'll use to kind of judge each other that we don't even know about. Like everyone's the same size in a box on the screen. I feel like there's something that's actually really good about that too. And it does, I don't have data to support this, and I probably don't even know what I'm talking about, to be honest. But I think it just feels like people are much more engaged in a way that they wouldn't be before, because everyone's kind of equal. And so it's not, we have everybody has, Zoom and Slack and like all these tools are available now. But I think the way we're interacting with them is really different than it was before. I do notice that almost everybody has their camera on now. They didn't have their camera on a few weeks ago. So I think there's a tech shift, but there's kind of an underlying culture shift that's really cool too, that I don't really understand yet, but I think there's going to be a lot of good that comes from it.
Betty, you could probably speak to that. You and I have both done work in status and status characteristics and these sorts of things. There's definitely some psychology that underpins what Charlie's talking about.
Yeah, there absolutely is. He's right about the height thing, by the way. So that is absolutely true. I'm sorry to say, being 5'4". Yeah. This can be an equalizer, and it is really true that that people long for face-to-face. We long for it for a whole variety of reasons, and so that we are seeing, I think, this shift towards getting more on camera. And I think you're exactly right. The advice prior to a lot of this, when we had more face-to-face, was if people don't want to be on camera, let them be off. It's okay. There's reasons why people work remotely, and a lot of people do want to work remotely because they don't necessarily want to be on camera. And now we're seeing a shift towards the longing. I just recently read something the other day that there's an increase in phone calls because people just want to hear each other's voices as well. So we're kind of reaching out more for that human contact, and we are animals, we're humans, and we want that as well. We do try to demonstrate our status in lots of other ways. So if you ever looked at somebody's email signature, that's another way we demonstrate that, with all of our different degrees and all those kinds of things that we put in there. But it can equalize things in this way, and it's kind of an interesting thing that we're going through right now. I think when one of the things I really liked about the conversation we just had was you don't have to be super high tech in this era right now of moving to virtual and remote work. A lot of people are longing for the town hall. A lot of people are longing for an individual to just reach out and let's have a Zoom chat. I just this morning had someone reach out to me and say, like, can I just get on to Zoom with you just to vent and chat about what's going on right now? I mean, so that, like, remembering that these lower tech just conversations are incredibly important, and not sort of getting all fancy with, like, should I get on Asana? Should I get on Trello? I don't know how to use those. Like, remember that a lot of people are getting on this for the first time and they're overwhelmed. And it's also cognitively taxing to be on this all day, every day. Steve, you and I have had this conversation around Zoom that if you're on this a lot, at the end of the day, it can be exhausting too. So, and also learning a lot of this can be exhausting for people if they haven't done it before. So also remembering that as well, that sometimes the downtime away from the tech can be important too.
Great, thank you. I want to circle back to you, Nick. So we're talking about hiring up at Rosie, and you talked about placing new hires alongside a current team member and giving them their 7 days and then moving to another team member. What are some of the deal breakers? You've had to weed out some of your new hires. What are the characteristics or the things you see that say this isn't going to be a fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the greatest extent possible, tying it back to data. So we have an idea of kind of what the performance is of an experienced veteran team member, and we have an idea of what someone who is new, what their kind of their internal journey is to becoming a veteran. We understand what their customer satisfaction score should be, what their level of productivity should be in terms of chats, tickets. And so we're able to quickly get a sense of, for somebody that's working either in a part-time or full-time role, how much output they should create, and also where they should be in terms of a band for their CSAT, their customer satisfaction score. So that's number one. Number two, other deal breakers are not attending scheduled meetings and not giving people a heads up about it. You know, okay, first time, totally understand, but if that becomes a habit, there's clearly something going on there where they either haven't communicated, you know, what their needs or their schedule are, and we just don't have the time to chase right now. And even if we do, it's not going to be as impactful for a new team member. They haven't delivered on the basics of the role. I'd say the other thing is we look for the soft skills. When we do company events, whether we're having a company happy hour remotely, I'm kind of talking to different team members and being like, have you spent a lot of time with that individual? What we're looking for is people leaning in. Are they getting invested in the culture? Are they going into the optional extracurriculars and trying to become more and more of a part of the team? That's something we look for. We look for people who are innovating. You know, you give them the box and then they break the box and they figure out a new way to do it, right? They're kind of optimizing around the tasks that you've given them. And when you find somebody like that, you know, you're like, yes, this is exactly what we were hoping to find. We weren't just wanting somebody who would check the box. We were looking for that person who was going to go above and beyond. And those standouts start to emerge. And you end up seeing a cohort, you know, in every 6 to 10 people you hire, of the people that are at one end of the spectrum or the other. So I think that's some of the signals we've been using. One other tech piece that I wanted to bring up that I think has been helpful for us in terms of doing, you know, there was a question around pulse checks, is I think that one of the challenges with this full remote work structure is the loss of anonymity in a sense. One thing that we've used very powerfully in our company is a suggestion box. It's an anonymous way. If somebody wants to give feedback, critique the leadership, talk about the company, they can leave a suggestion in a physical box in the office, and every month at town hall, we'll open up that box and we'll discuss it openly and transparently, and nothing is sacred. Any question can be asked. Well, how do you do a remote suggestion box when everything's being tracked? And what we did was we set up an anonymous Google form where our employees were able to both in real time during our town hall, but also before, submit suggestions that we talked about. And the questions ranged from, you know, how is compensation going to change as a result of all the extra hours we're working? You know, how are you thinking about, you know, how many more hires are you expecting? When do you think we can come back to the office? Is it going to be May? Is it going to be later than that? So I think providing channels for your team members to be able to provide you feedback when you can't necessarily do, meet somebody in the hall or hang out by the water cooler, providing those, especially the anonymous channels to provide feedback, is very important right now.
So what's interesting is, and we'll go to some of our audience questions in a moment, but what I'm hearing from all of you is that a lot of the guidance, a lot of the advice is old school stuff. It's talk to people individually, it's interact, figure out what's going on with them, use KPIs to measure performance and use data to determine performance, and town halls, even if they are virtual, but a lot of these are applying whatever technology we need to. It's not all fancy new technology. It's really applying what tools we have in kind of an old school format to achieve some of those things that leaders have done all along. One thing that I'm hearing as I'm listening to all of you is the burden on leaders and managers just seems to be bigger and bigger and bigger. So what you might have accomplished by simply walking down the hall and chatting to the people that you see, now you've got to set up, discrete half-hour Zoom calls to check in on folks. And every other piece of it takes longer, takes more effort on the part of the leader. And it's the right thing to do. You're certainly in that position where you're responsible for this. But I guess the question for the panelists is, what advice do you have specifically for leaders and managers? How do you maintain your sanity? How do you maintain some balance when the prescriptive advice for everything is do more, boss, and make it work? So how do you get that balance? You all have great ideas.
I mean, I'll start. I think you got to be vulnerable. I think that people aren't looking, especially right now with what's going on out there. I think they're not looking for someone who can just, brush it all away and say everything's going to be fine. I think you got to talk and be real with people. How is this shelter at home affecting you personally? What are your hopes? What are your needs? Being really open about the challenges that you're facing as a leader right now. And because it's likely that your team is facing some of those same challenges and they may not be vocalizing it. And what you can do is provide the air cover for the organization to start having those conversations. And I think that's what people want right now. We're in a time of great uncertainty, and we don't need leaders who are going to tell us that everything's going to be okay or everything's going great. We need leaders who are going to get in the trenches, who are going to care for people and hear their concerns. And so I think that's been the biggest thing that I've been talking about with my team. I think the other part is you have to help people understand this is a marathon, not a sprint. A really good point that was brought up earlier is that when you're in your office all day, it's easy to wire in and have no separation from work and home and just continue to be working. And so whether it's just reminding people, hey, have you stood up and gotten some water? Have you gone outside today? Carving out time for your lunch schedule. We have to be a little bit more purposeful about taking care of the needs of our team in a way that I don't think we've ever had before, and that's okay to do.
Good points. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Nick's point about being vulnerable, because I think one of the things that I, personally for me, I'm a very social, outgoing person. I get my energy from other people, so being locked in your house is kind of a tough situation. But I really love talking to my employees now, like not just as a to get something done, but like just chat about personal stuff, because it gives me energy. And I think people appreciate me saying that, like, hey, I'm happy to be chatting with you right now, because otherwise I guess I'm just talking to the voices in my head, who knows. I think that kind of thing makes a huge difference. And then I think in general, just making sure that you really kind of focus on people first. I mean, I think one of the best things that's come out of this is that sometimes in a company, you think of that person's an engineer and then a person. Like maybe you shouldn't think of that way, but that person's a salesperson, and that's like the first thought you have in your head. I think now when you're talking to people, you think of who they are first. I mean, especially you can see the stuff in the background, and you empathize with people a lot, in a more real way. Like I have one of my employees who has 3 kids. I always thought I empathized with like whatever that's like to have 3 kids, since I don't. But when I'm having a meeting with her now, and you can see in the background that it looks like some sort of war is happening and furniture's tipping over and things are flying by, like you're like, oh, that's what it's like to have 3 kids under 7 years old. I think there's a lot of, I think that there are nice touches that I think hopefully we can find a way to take back with us when we go back to the office.
Great points. I'd like to take a moment to address some of our questions from the audience. So we'll start with, I want to start with a question from Nicole. We're revamping to bring on remote interns, and everyone has worked remotely. So we're already a team that's working remotely. How do we communicate culture, manage performance, et cetera, for students that aren't established professional employees? So in other words, these are interns. These are folks that don't have a lot of work experience, and we don't have the opportunity to just literally physically take them under our wing because everyone's remote. So how do we do that sort of partnering, or that sort of apprenticeship in this remote setting? Anyone want to field that one?
So I'll jump in with a couple ideas, and then I'm sure everyone
Sure.
else has them too. But I think a couple things that you can really do that start off with trying to convey the culture is to start with stories. Like, so, you know, we all have people who founded organizations here. We also have people who kind of have gone through sort of defining moments. And I think part of that has to do with tell the story. So tell great stories, not only about the organization, but also great stories about people who stepped up, and they can be small stories, you know, they can, but they're stories. And so a lot of times you'll go into, I especially see this if you're in a place like a healthcare organization is a great example. You'll see like on a screen, like sometimes they just scroll by about somebody who just stepped up and beyond. Can it be a small thing or it can be a big thing of these stories that tell us, you know, who we are. And that tells you a bit about what is kind of, where are we in terms of, you know, how far the boundary goes, what are the great creative ideas. And the other thing I'd say is pair somebody up. And so Nick's great example of, you know, I've got some pretty senior people who are, they are the people who, you know, are great and sort of the people we want you to role model. And then I've got some newbies coming in. So let's buddy them up a bit to see. And then the senior people can also be sort of the socializers of, yeah, this is where we want you to be. And also can be the, hey, you didn't show up at the meeting. Let me just be, you know, let me just check in on you. You know, Ken said the same thing too. It doesn't always have to be the boss. It can be somebody else asking the question of, hey, I'm just calling in to say, what's going on today? Yeah, that's something that we like you to be at the meeting. So let me just socialize you with that.
A follow-up question on that, but another audience question is there research on frequency of interaction? So it seems like the conventional wisdom is that going remote means meeting more often. Is there any research that backs that up?
Yeah, you have to be a little careful with that you're not micromanaging, so that, you know, what part of the idea of being remote can also be like, you know, let me be alone to work some of the time too. And so you have to, I think, set some guidelines for that a bit. So I think part of it's managing expectations. And I'm sure everyone has some differences on this, but part of it is, all right, how often am I checking in? So you might be checking in, you know, one-on-one with somebody earlier to get some feedback on them. And then, you know, we're doing that, you know, kind of once a week. Are we doing a team meeting once a week? I think the key thing here is that setting the expectations. There's no kind of right or wrong, but the key is that if I start working for you and I'm expecting that, yeah, I'm going to see you more often, but suddenly you're checking in with me 6 times a day, and I'm thinking, you know, what's going on here? I'm pretty good at this. But if you tell me what I'm going to do at the beginning is be checking in with you once a day to see how things are going, and then that's going to ease off. All right, my expectations are set up, right? So that's kind of the key thing. As Ken was mentioning, you know, a lot of people in an agile workforce do kind of the daily, real quick, you know, how are things going? What are you working on today? Do you have any roadblocks kind of thing? It's a 1 minute and you're done. Those are simple and easy. And then you might have a team meeting once a week, you know, and all hands once a month. Those are pretty standard, but maybe you do it more often with somebody who's new. But that eases off.
A related question. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that brings up great points. I mean, people can only meet or exceed your expectations if they know what they are. And I would just add, write it down. You have to be so much more purposeful now, especially I think with interns. If you want to communicate culture, manage performance for students, write down what your expectations are so there's something that they can go back to as their reference guide. The documentation of the business, that's the software of the organization. It has to continue to evolve. And so, you know, definitely write it down. Have checklists, build processes. If you're going to have a meeting to talk about performance, make sure that there's minutes that get sent after the meeting so that the stuff gets memorialized and that they can go back to it.
That's a great point. And that's a practice that is good advice in any context, whether we're remote or not, but we tend to sort of let it slide when we're all face to face, because then we can just check in, hey, how you doing with that project? In a remote setting, it's got to be written down. I think that's absolutely right. And that sort of gets to another question that we've got in the panel. What advice do you have for managers who are nervous about out of sight, out of mind? How can they get comfortable that the things they need to get done are happening without smothering their reports with excessive requests for status updates? So you don't want to micromanage, but you might be nervous that things may or may not be getting done. Advice?
I mean, we are facing a little bit of a situation where I can see where the employees that are kind of higher up love the idea now, where we're just saying, well, this is what we want done and why. Whereas some of our newer employees are still on the, can you tell me how to do it every day? And I think if you have to really break that out, because most people don't want to be told how to do things. They want to be told what to accomplish, and they want to do that themselves, but not everybody's that way. And so I think that's harder, to me, that's a little bit harder to read remotely. It's something that we're trying to kind of dig into a little bit more. So I think that that's just something that I've noticed in the last couple of days that I think we have to do a better job of clarifying. I mean, it's an ongoing battle. It's like a culture battle. You don't win culture. You just have to keep doing different things to kind of address it and be open to learning the truth about it. I think as a CEO, you always want to think your company's operating perfectly, but you really should be spending time finding ways where you're not doing the right thing and try to fix that. I think that's especially important now because this is so new that I think the first couple weeks of this, it's kind of a bonding experience. And so you can get away with maybe making mistakes that you weren't realizing you were making. But I think now that we're starting to get more into it, I think some things that we maybe need to do better are going to become more obvious, and we have to be open to looking for that.
Great. Thanks, panel. So I want to make sure we're respectful of time, and I know everyone's probably got another Zoom call to go to. So I'll just finish this all up. Let's see, get this going. And we've talked about Q&A, and what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of heads up. So thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate, thanks for the panelists, and we appreciate your time. Just so we all know, Korea is hosting a series of COVID-19 focused webinars in the coming months. The next topic will be on April 23rd, and it's dealing with labor and employment issues during the pandemic. And that will feature Paul Wagner from Cornell and Harry Katz, also from the Cornell ILR School, and our very own Nate Cook, entrepreneur in residence and attorney at law. This will cover things that employment issues in the hospitality industry and practical issues business owners should consider when creating recovery plans to re-engage the workforce. So stay tuned and look for a registration link. In addition, Korea has created a COVID-19 resources page for startups, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. Visit korea.cornell.edu and select COVID-19 resources in the menu bar to see the full list. Thank you again for joining us, and we appreciate your time.